Right, welcome to episode 94 of Retropower Uncut. As Jamie behind the camera was saying the other day, 6 away from 100. 100 episodes, that's insane. I'm going to start with the Manta. I think that literally we'd just started on this last week, I think. So it was in for a gearbox swap from a 4-speed to a 5-speed. Straightforward job because there's a 5-speed on the later Manta, which mated up to the same block in the GTE. So it's a pretty easy conversion. We had to make a gearbox cross member, modified the transmission tunnel hole, obviously fit everything, and yeah, John did an absolutely superb job. Went really smoothly. We did a bit of an axle re-gasket on the axle while we were at it, putting the fresh oil in that, obviously fresh oil in the gearbox. And then yeah, John took it for a test drive. I think that was end of last week, Friday maybe. He reckoned everything was good. We've just had a couple of little audio bits to do on this as well. The chap who owns it had sort of half-assedly fitted, and I'm sure he'll admit this, a head unit, one of those Blaupunkt Bremen head units, which looked really cool, but it wasn't really properly fitted, and there was a sub that was kind of not connected, an active sub under the passenger seat. So we've just neatened that up, neatened the speaker installation up. I took it for a drive yesterday, I think it was, and yeah, I can report absolutely 100%. Gearbox is perfect in it, no leaks, audio sounds good, drives superbly. It really does, actually made me want one. I've had a couple of these before and made me want one again really. The only thing I'd change is it needs the Recaro seats to give you a bit more support, and then ideally a bit more power, always the case, but one of these with a throttle-bodied red top in it and Recaros, and everything else as it is on this with the Willwoods and the Bill Steins, it's absolutely spot on. So that's ready to hand over. You'll know, I guess you'll probably see this if you go to the VBOA show at Sywell, which must be towards the end of this month, next month. I guess that'll probably be there. Right, moving on to Land Cruiser. So lots of different things going on this. James finally got through from Milner Off-Road, the rebuild kit for the steering idler. So that's been rebuilt. And then I believe today or tomorrow we'll get the steering box back from Kylie Clinton's, who have been rebuilding the steering box. At which point we'll have everything to finish the build of the steering assembly. So that pretty much completes the work on the chassis. We also received earlier this week the e-stop handbrake. It's going to have an electric handbrake on it, which is like a linear actuator. A company in the States called e-stop make them. It's quite a nice setup. They're kind of torque reactive, so they pull to a certain tension and then stop. So we'll have a push button on the centre console, which we made provision for in the billet surround around the shifters, which we'll use to actuate that handbrake, which will then pull onto the original handbrake cables, which are attached to the MR2. There are MR2 handbrake cables on MR2 calipers. So figuring the mounting out for that's going to be on the cards. And then on the body side of things, we finished the roof. So I figured it was going to be a lot easier to do the headliner with the roof off and upside down. So beginning of this week, I did the headlining on it, lined it all with like a really low density 1/4 inch foam, and then just a perforated white vinyl over the top of that. That then enabled us to get the roof on, which went smoothly. We'd already trial fitted that, so that it went as smooth as expected. On the dash, it was very cool to throw a few things on that and get it looking quite complete. So we'd already got the lower dash panel in. I put the vintage air control panel in that, and then put the switches in the upper part of the dash and fitted the little billet anodized knobs that we'd designed and made for it. And it looks, I mean, you kind of envisage how things are going to look from various sketches and things we've done, but seeing it actually come together, it's awesome. It looks amazing. The lower dash panel's actually back off at the minute because Adam's doing a little bit of work designing a panel that the ECUs will mount to. So we did, at metalwork stage, we did some threaded bosses welded to the inside of the bulkhead, and they were aligned with an alignment jig that we did in CAD. So we've got the bolt spacing. He's just working out the final panel size at the minute, and then we'll translate the bolt spacing onto that and plasma cut that out. And that panel will mount the Motec, it's a Motec M130 ECU, Motec 30 channel PDM, and then there's also a control box that's going to go on that for the Dakota Digital Dash, which is basically the unit that translates all the signals from all the engine sensors, etc. And then it has just a single cable and it connects to the actual instrument panel to translate all the data to that. So that'll go on that mounting panel as well. So he's just working on that now. Hinges, we got the rear door hinges back from machining, or half of them I think. I think we've got the upper hinges, both parts of the upper hinges, which have been machined from 6082 aluminium. We're waiting, I think I'll get the rest of those hinge parts through this week from Andy at Concept 303. And then once we've got those, trialled them with the bronze bushes that we're putting in them, if all's well there, they'll go away to be coated. Actually, I'm not sure on those, whether they're going to be coated or whether we're going to paint them body colour. There's still a decision to make on that. But on the subject of hinges, the front door hinges are going to be our own design as well. Again, mainly because we're just not very happy with the old steel on steel kind of pivot pin. You get rust coming out, so we're redesigning them so they've all got bronze bushes in them. The front doors, we'd done a design already. George was a little bit concerned about how strong they were, because the sort of part of the hinge that sits each side, there's only quite a thin bit of metal attaching those. So he's done a slightly beefed up version of that. 3D printed it. We trialled those yesterday in 3D print, and we're happy with how the door works, and you know, it doesn't clash with anything, because in making it a little bit beefier for the bronze bushes, you actually move the pivot point slightly, only a few millimeters, but it does mean the action of the door is very slightly different. So we just wanted to make sure that didn't mean it hit anything and it still opened and closed as it should, which it did. So those are going to be machined now. And what else have we got on this? The transfer box. Nat was just assembling the transfer box in the last episode. He was awaiting a shim for one of the bearings, which arrived. I think that was actually from Toyota, so that allowed him to finish that. So that transfer box is ready to go now. The only thing we're waiting for actually on the whole engine and transmission sort of setup, frustratingly, is the torque converter. And there was a sort of sequence of events on that. We didn't sort of sort the torque converter before we stripped the engine down. And our suspicion was we needed a 100 series Land Cruiser torque converter and flex plate, early 100 series, so V8 Land Cruiser, which is just essentially the bell housing we're using is V8 Land Cruiser. It mates the A440 transmission from the 80 series Land Cruiser to the V8 block. But we weren't 100% sure whether the flex plate would match up with the crank in the 1UZ, because actually the V8 Land Cruiser is a later iteration. I can't remember the exact engine number, but it's not the same V8 as in the LS400 like the one we've got. So we wanted to check that the flex plate definitely fitted, but we couldn't really check that until we'd finished the engine build. And we also didn't want to have the flex plate sitting around, because although we can return it to a Toyota if it didn't fit, there's only a few days to do that. So we wanted to basically wait till the end of the engine build, so we could then get the flex plate and still be able to return it if it wasn't right. It was right though, so it fitted, which means we could then go ahead and order the torque converter that we know would mate up with that. But the torque converter we then found was on a 5-week wait. So frustratingly, we've now got a 5-week wait for the torque converter, which was more or less unavoidable in all honesty. I don't think it's going to hold anything up. It's just a bit frustrating, because it would be nice to get the engine and transmission in here now and the body on now, but in reality, the only reason that's nice is because it would be quite pleasing to see it. In reality, there's a load more jobs we can crack on with, so we're going to get on with putting the wiper mechanism all together on that, getting the rest of the glass in there. Plenty to crack on with. I'm going to swing past the Mustang. We had that over the pit, or in fact it is over the pit now, to do the handbrake cables, because that was one of the things I think I mentioned we'd been waiting for from Summit Racing. It arrived when we got the bumper mounts and the instrument cluster. So Adam was just finishing off the handbrake cables on this, and he was also doing a bulkhead panel as a sort of insulative panel that sits on the bulkhead behind the back seat, which he was just trimming to size and installing. So little bits on this. Fundamentally at the moment, this is waiting for me to go through the wiring and just formulate a list of everything that needs to be added. The owner supplied us with a sort of generic universal wiring harness kit with it, which actually, because they're fairly simple, will do the job. But there's a few extra things we need to factor in, so we're just adding extra wires into that harness before it's all loomed up. So it just needs me to plan through what we're doing on that, and then that will be done. The Stratos, actually, I should have mentioned that earlier. Gaz, Steve and Mark, as well as working on the Camaro a lot, have been working on the Stratos rear clam. So that's now painted, flatted, polished, done, along with the boot lid as well, and refitted on the car. Looking great. Now we've done that, we can 3D scan those flanks and finalise the design of the vents that sit into those apertures on the side there. We're almost there already with those, but George wisely wanted to re-scan once it was painted, just to make sure the thickness of the paint didn't affect anything. And then the mould for the main rear window, if you like, panel is done. We're going to pick that up hopefully tomorrow, and then we'll be able to set about making, basically fiberglassing that panel, making that panel in fiberglass. And the glass that's going to go with it, there's a triangular glass panel that's going into it. The template for that has been sent off to make the glass for that as well. So that's all coming together. Once that's done, we're going to be doing some track testing in that. I just want to make sure that we've got all of the final engine covering and vents and things in, so it's the airflow out of that engine compartment is representative of the final installation, because heat management is almost certainly going to be one of the complications on that car. Right, have a wander over here. I'm just going to pause on my list a second because there's so many things this week. I feel like I'm definitely going to miss some stuff. The Land Cruiser. Jim was working on the exhaust manifolds. We were re-tapping the Lambda sensor ports on the exhaust manifold, so we could use generic Bosch Lambda sensors rather than the original Toyota ones. What else was there on that? Headlining, yes, I think I've done all that. Excellent. So we'll have a wander over here to Morris, and quite a few different things happening on this. The fuel tank arrived. Concept Racing have fabricated that, which as usual they've done an amazing job. We use them for most of our more complicated aluminium fabrication work, so fuel tanks and radiators typically. That looks great. It all fits exactly as we hoped it would. The little recess works perfectly with the space saver spare, so that's good to go. Really happy with that. Adam's been making a start on the bonnet. We want to get that fitted so we can assess the space for the radiator top tank, so we can then get the radiator pattern off to concept for them to make that. So he's just doing a bit of a build-up on this. It's got these side mouldings that sit around here. We're just thinking about tapping these pegs. They originally just had like sort of spire clip metal clips that pushed onto these, which we're not really mad keen on. So we're going to see if we can, they're exactly 5mm, we're going to see if we can tap them to M5 and put nuts on the back. And then there are little side repeaters that sit through into this recess here, through the hole here, which Adam's going to be fitting, and then that'll be ready to go on. George has been working on the sort of glove box infill panels. So originally they were little flat down glove boxes. We want to put some flat panels in place there, which are not openable, but they do need to be able to come out if we need to access things. So we've designed some panels that are going in there. They're going to be machined in aluminium, and the way they're going to fit is they have little pegs out the bottom, little 4mm machined pegs that sit into some rubber grommets. We've drilled and put rubber grommets in the frame at the bottom, so they'll sit in. At the top there'll be a bracket with one or several magnets at the top, and the inside of the cover panel has a little steel strip inlaid into it, so you can basically shut it and it magnets itself shut. And at that point it's not going to come open. There's nothing to pull on to get it open, but if you do need to get in there to access, you can put a little pick tool through the gap, twizzle it around and pull them out, so it's possible to get them out, but they're not obviously an openable item. So that really has been the thing we wanted to get done to allow us to put the rest of the dash together. So once we've now done the holes that mount those, got a plan in place for all of that, George was literally just offering up a 3D print of the final design on those. And then that now means we can get in there and get the heater box installed on the left hand side, which takes up almost all the space on the left. We've already got the PDMs in there. With the heater in, we can finalise the wire routing behind there. We can then get the aircon, refrigerant and heater water pipes finished, get the instrument cluster in, and just start building from there really. We get the lower dash section in. The carpets are ready already, so Dean's going to bring those over next week. We can get those offered up and check the fit of those. The centre console can go in, and on the subject of the centre console, we've got some machine bits through. So this week one of the things that arrived was the cordless phone charging dock, if you like. So there's just a tray, basically a machine tray that's going to be black anodised that sits in that console. It's got a recess in it for a cordless phone charger, so you just put your phone in that tray. It holds your phone but also charges it while you're driving. I'm trying to think whether there was another machine part arrived for this. What was that?
Door locks.
Yes, that's it. Well reminded. Yeah, the little lock sliders. So to operate the door locks from inside, which are now mini door locks, we're doing some little sliders. There'll be a vertical rod to the central locking motor, but we wanted a way of locking and unlocking the doors from inside manually as well. So we've done some nice little machined bezels that will sit sort of vertically at the back of the door card with a little slider handle, which then actually connects onto the vertical rod that goes to the locking motor. So they look good. They'll be sent off to be anodised. And speaking of the door cards, James has been carrying on with the patterns for the door cards. Now we've got a confession to make there, and that last time I think we were talking about the 3D scanning. We 3D scanned it all, and we're going to do them in CAD. It's the first time we've done a 3D scan to make a door card, you know, exactly the right profile with all the holes in the right place. But it turned out to be a bit of a pain in the ass, and we're not quite sure why, but we got to the point of cutting a template and various bits weren't quite right. I don't know if it was the translation between the scan and a 2D surface, which might have perhaps flattened out the slight curve of the door. I'm not actually sure if that's what was the cause or not. But one way or another, it wasn't quite right. And actually, we just, on this occasion, just thought, let's just cut our losses on that one, revert to the simple technique of just cutting a paper template to match and marking through where the holes are. It was a nice idea, and it's definitely one we'll pick up again in future, because it does mean that once you've got that pattern on CAD, you can just replicate it. So if you did another car the same, for instance, or wanted to, you know, maybe you made a mistake on making the door card further down the line, making another one is very quick, which is often the reason that we're making things in CAD or drawing things in CAD rather than just hand cutting them. And that is one of the biggest reasons, particularly in the sheet metal. People often sort of question why we would draw just like a two-dimensional sheet metal panel to when we're just doing a repair panel, and it's not so much that it's quicker to draw it in CAD and CNC it for making one. You could hand make it in probably the same time, but the problem arises if you hand make one and then you want to make some changes to it, you've got to do it all again, whereas with the CAD one, all of the work goes into the drawing part of it. So once you've made one, if you make a mistake or it's not quite right, it's very quick to edit it and make another one, so you save the time in the long run. Anyway, yes, so door cards paper templated. We're just working on the fastening method for those. And that, I think, is where we're at in here. So I'm going to hand over to Nat to see what's been going on next door. I think this is going to be a big episode, isn't it? I shall catch you again next week. Don't forget, there's t-shirts available in the online shop, and mugs and hoodies and all manner of other things. So please buy our merch. Here's Nat for the second half.
Right, well, thank you, Cal, and here we are in the fabrication lair, and we're going to start with Project 1, Mark 1 Escort, which has been moving forward a little bit more because we've had some more pairs of hands on it. Scott's been doing most of the work on the actual body shell, although Tom's done a little bit as well. Scott's set to, I think last week we talked about putting the engine in and starting on the engine mounts. The engine mounts are now finished. He's finished all the fabrication on those, tacked them all up in situ, fully welded them, and then obviously repeated while he had the engine in that position. He's made a second set so that we've got the set for the other car. So they're all done, fully welded and finished. He's then checked the gearbox position. We've ummed and ahed and moved it up and down a bit and generally worked out exactly where we want the gearbox, and that's finalised in that position now. We are going to make a little dummy sort of thing to hold the gearbox in place. We're actually going to do the cross member when we can put the car on the lift, so once it's rolling, just because it's quite awkward to do when it's on the jig, because you're effectively working underneath there and you're just making life unreasonably difficult for yourself trying to do the gearbox cross member while it's still on the select jig. So we'll do that on the lift a little bit later on. But he's got the transmission tunnel in now. He's cut out, trimmed back and set the flange width all the way around the enlarged transmission tunnel. Got that pressing tidied up a little bit, taking some creases out of it that they tend to have in when they're delivered. Tidied that up, put that in, marked out where the gear stick needs to come through and the slot for the gear stick mechanism, and cut out for that. The cowling for that, I talked about doing a ZF cowling. We've got a few revisions to do on that area because of a couple of other bits that we've got to add to the top of the transmission tunnel. There's various other things that we talked about. the interface for the in-car entertainment will probably be on top of the tunnel there, as that's the loose plan at the moment. So we're going to hold fire on doing the cowling on the top of the tunnel around the gear lever for the moment, until we've got a few final bits of design work done for that area. So at the moment that's just going to be a hole for the time being. So that's done, so the tunnel's done, and then the next stage moving on from that is the rear arch tubs, because in order to fit the rear suspension we need to have the rear arches all cut out and have the tubbing operation done on that. So Scott's removed the outer inner arches and the inner arch tubs. He's pulled all of that out, cleaned the seams back, and he's then used the checked that the template fit is good, because we've got a template that we've used on a few Escorts and it is. So he's checked the fit of that. We've never actually put that in CAD before, so we've done the old 2D scan of photograph it, scale it, and then draw it out in CAD. So we've got that now sort of as a reference point in CAD, and he's then plasma cut, CNC plasma cut 4 of those out. So we've got a pair. This is for the vertical inner arch face. He's cut 4 of those out for that section, and then he's also cut out no, actually he's not cut them yet. He's about to cut out the strips that actually extend that out and across. And to make those arch tubs, what we do is we have the vertical inner face, the back face of the wheel arch, if you like, which goes against the chassis rail at the bottom. Then we have the actual arch shape going over the top. And where they meet, we tank roll the 2 sections and then weld them together around that tank roll line. Now, a slight hold up on that is I thought we had a half-inch radius set of tank rolls, but we don't. So Matt Stakes' metalwork machinery has saved the day and dealt with my lack of organisation, and has emergency DHL'd us a set of half-inch tank rolls, which are going to sort out the shaping of that area, which was very kind of him, and I can't stress enough how helpful Stakes' are, and that very, very well recommended. Big plug for them here, for Matt here, but extremely highly recommended for metalworking machinery, and has always been incredibly helpful to us, and on this occasion, yet again, has been very helpful to us. So yeah, so they're going to be tank rolled, TIG welded around that corner, and that will form the arch tubs. You'll see them taking shape properly next week once we're actually a bit further into making them, but Scott's working on the beginnings of them now. We are at this point, Carl will probably have mentioned this already, but we're on Wednesday, bear in mind again, because we've got a slightly short week for various reasons. So we're actually filming Wednesday afternoon at the moment. So again, there'll be a bit of a leap ahead next week because there's quite a bit more of this week yet to go. So yeah, arch tubs, once they're done, we have the CAD for the turrets that are then going to be cut into the arch tubs. I need to edit that CAD slightly, because this car, because it's running 15-inch wheels, will run a little bit lower than the car that we did for Gordon, which means I need to extend the turrets up a little bit and basically raise all the suspension mountings up into the shell a little bit to move the axle centre line up to compensate for the increased wheel diameter. And in order to do that, I obviously need to make the turrets taller, but I have those on CAD already, so I shall just edit the CAD model for the turrets, then we can cut those out, roll them, and start assembling those, cutting those into the inner arch tubs and building all the rear end. We've still got to build a jig for the turret tops. This is another section I've got to fabricate off the select jig. I've got to make a gantry that locates the turret tops in the right places. That's something I haven't got at the minute. I need to make that so that we can make sure the turret tops are level and on the correct separation in the correct place fore and aft. So I'm going to make a carrier to carry the subframe under the back of the car, and then I need a gantry to carry the turret tops above it, because they're kind of a separate part of the shell there. So that's where we're at on the body shell. Sorry, missed a bit. Tom today has come off the other work he was doing on the Jensen and come on to do some bits on this, which was finishing off the roof corners. The roof was all welded in, but he hadn't quite got round to finishing off the corners, as they needed a bit of tapping up and adjustment and chasing in of creases and things like that, getting the corners all sort of metal finished in the right places, and then they needed brazing. So he's now done that. He's brazed the 4 roof corners, finished shaping those off, and then they're ready for leading now. They've got to be leaded all the 4 corners of the roof. So yeah, he's getting there with that. Done the front corners, done the rear corners. That's all looking pretty good. So moving on, in terms of Escort, we're going to go over here. If I seem slightly distracted, it's because Rich over there has just ripped his jeans a little bit and decided to make some very short shorts, which are quite disturbing. That's why I've seemed distracted a little bit. So anyway, moving on from short shorts to a big pile of fabrication for the Escort. I have managed a few hours, though not enough hours yet, on the rear suspension this week. Mainly today, really. I've just done a few hours today on the next stage of fabricating this, where I can explain what's going on here. This is the rear beam for the rear subframe, which mounts into the car across there, and the diff is bolted to this. So the Sierra diff bolts in here. These are currently solid location rings. They will actually be a pair of rubber bushes. So if I get one of those bushes, I can show you. These are a BMW part, an E36 differential bush, like that. So that's a BMW bush. They're a press fit into these housings in here. So those press into these two turned cups, and then this mounting here then bolts to these bushes, but this is bolted via all these bolts to the rear cover of the Sierra diff. So that then locates into this beam. Off the bottom of the beam are some more brackets which come off the bottom of here, which carry the wishbones. So the wishbone pivots are there, and there's brackets that come off here to carry the wishbone each side. And then going fore and aft from those brackets are two tubes which go to the front moustache bar, as I call it, and the wishbone brackets on the moustache bar to tie the wishbone brackets solidly together front to back. And then off the top of here, there are two more tubes that come off the back of this tube, just clear of the diff back wing, as I call it here. Two more tubes come off here and then kick out and span out to the front corners of the moustache bar. Try and explain all this without, I mean, it's easier to see in a CAD model, but basically that bar then sits about there. And then there are two tubes that go, I'm not going to be able to prop this up now, am I? There we go. There are two tubes which then go from here down and out, and then two that drop down onto there and there, and basically tie all that lot together. And say then there's the lower tubes which come forward from the wishbone mountings down here straight onto the wishbone mountings there, and the wishbones straddle between the two, mount the upright over here. So that's a loose idea of how all that lot goes. It's getting there now. The really awkward bits of fabrication are sort of progressing quite well. This is all tacked up. The next step is fully welding this. I kind of hope to have had that done for ready for the video, but I've just not had a chance. So yeah, that's where we're at on rear suspension fabrication. Progressing fairly well. Hopefully next week should see the bulk of it done, if I can stay on this rather than having to do a lot of other jobs. But hopefully I'll be able to stay on this for a bit more of the time next week, fingers crossed. So yeah, that's where we are on project 1, the Escort. We'll move on to Churchill Jag. Stu's gone home. We've noticed one big change, which is that the engine is now out. We've taken the engine out so we could change the front cross member for one that's built up with some wishbones on it, so that we could check ride heights for one thing, check clearances, check wheel clearances on the wishbones, do a few other things, and then we're going to scan the front subframe and get all the pickup points into CAD. Scan and measure, I think, be a bit of a mixture of both. Basically, we've decided we want to try and build the front end in CAD on this one first, so that we can just do another iteration of analysis on the bump steer and Ackerman of the setup. Because we're going to be running a slightly different ride height to the Utah Jaguar, where we set those parameters on Utah won't really be valid on this one. So we really want to go back through it all again. And it was quite tricky on that car because of the way the geometry works on a Mark II Jag. It's actually quite difficult to analyse. Basically, everything interferes with everything else quite dramatically. It's obviously that is always the case. Obviously, the geometry of a wishbone suspension setup, moving one point does affect everything else. But there are dramatic effects at the extremes of travel on this setup that are quite surprising and not necessarily what you'd expect. So we really want to put this all in CAD so we can actually simulate it all in there and just double check that everything's going to work at the ride height that this car's going to run at compared to the ride height that the previous car ran at. So that's one of the reasons for pulling the engine out, so that we've got access and we've got the ability to change the front cross member, and we can also do some mock-up work then with the wheels to check the clearances. So that's there. And then in terms of wheel clearances, I'll wander around here And you can see a chunk of the work that Stu's been doing, which is we have our mock-up, our faithful variable offset mock-up wheel on, which we are using to check for wheel arch clearance, which as you can see is pretty jolly tight. So Stu's cut out all the original outer inner wheel arch, chopped all that out of the way, and then he's setting to on fabricating the new outer inner arch. If that makes sense. I keep going an outer inner, I can't think of what else to describe it as really. They're always in two halves. The inner shell is fine, it's the outer shell of the inner arch where the problem lies. So he's working on that, and then going to be working on the final wheel arch design on the quarter panel, but we need to get the inners done first. So he's cut all that out. Obviously we're going to have to extend the foot on this section. So once this is done, he'll extend the foot on that down. But he's been shaping this area up. And on the subject of shaping, actually, a little offshoot, though our regular viewers will have noticed that there's been a bit of a lack of autofocus episodes recently, partly because we've been incredibly busy and it's been difficult to find time to do one, but also partly because I wanted to do one on shaping. And it's a bit of a broad subject, but I wanted to do one on metal shaping. And because of the jobs we've had around us, we've managed to get quite a lot of footage on metal shaping. So that's another reason we've been holding fire, is to bank enough footage to try and get a really good broad brush sort of overview of metal shaping in one video. So it's going to be quite difficult to do. It's a bit like some of the welding videos I was going to try and do. It's such a broad subject, it's difficult to condense it down into a sort of soundbite really, but we're going to try and do it. And things like this are one of the areas we're going to cover on how you go about making a bit like that. So yeah, Stu's been on with that. He's basically nearly finished the rear valance. He's finished it as far as he can without finishing the quarters. So he's finished all the centre section. Last week you saw the number plate recess. He was just fabricating the number plate recess. He's finished the number plate recess. That's all TIG welded in, metal finished and done. Fits beautifully as usual. Just a brilliant job, lovely job. Finished the bottom recess. He's made the corners. He's made the rear corner sections, which I can sort of offer it up. I'm not going to try and offer it up too well, but basically he's made the corner sections. But he can't really go any further with the corner sections now until we've established the quarter line and the wheel arch line. So that's what he's moved on to now. And that's progressing quite well actually. He's getting there nicely. They're always quite tricky because there's an awful lot of shape to inner arches. Try and do them in one piece is pushing the amount of metal. Again, we'll cover more of that in the autofocus episode, but you're really starting to push how far you can move the metal, and you always need to start with a surprisingly thick piece of metal so that when you put that much shape into it, it doesn't get too thin. You also need quite a lot of shrinking power, because if you try and do it all by stretching the material, it gets miles too thin. You need to be able to shrink some of it to thicken it as well as thin it, stretching it, and you need the balance of the two to be able to get a lot of shape out of one piece of metal without having to put joins in. But anyway, that's all on the side. We'll cover that elsewhere. But yeah, that's all looking pretty good. So that's about where we're at with the Churchill Jag at the moment. I'm going to make life really difficult for Jamie and reverse him through here. So that's about where we're at with that. Now he's reversing rapidly out here, because the next thing we're going to mention is the Jensen CV8. And in front of us is what Rich has been working on, which is the old original Jensen CV8 windscreen. You may recall from previous, me wobbling on previously on video about the fact that we were struggling with the screen aperture, the front screen aperture, to get it the correct shape. And we were basically trying to sculpt it in filler and fiberglass, and it's quite tricky to get the shape correct without getting waviness in it. It's just a very difficult process. So Gaz kept saying that he would like a metal frame that we could put into the car for him to work to give us a fixed point of reference for the screen, which is fine, except that a metal frame of that sort of size will be extremely bendy and floppy and won't maintain its shape, and therefore it won't really bring anything to the party. And then I had the idea, well, my idea was we really needed something connected to the glass. Gaz wanted a metal frame. With a bit of lateral thinking, I thought, well, actually what we want to do is make sure that the glass fits correctly and then fix the frame to the glass. And that's exactly what we're doing now. What we've done is we're using, for the fillet, the cover seal that basically covers up the bond line on this joint, we're going to use BMW E30 M3, as that was one of the very few cars where they changed to a bonded in screen on an aperture that was originally designed for a fillet seal type screen. There aren't many cars that have done that. Most cars that had a bonded in screen were designed for a bonded in screen, but the E30 M3 wasn't. They used the same screen aperture, give or take, as a normal E30 BMW, but then you used a screen fillet to cover the gap, basically. So we're using that screen fillet, which also sets the depth of the glass when it's pushed into the adhesive, and does a couple of other things as well. And it also actually clips onto the glass rather than just pushing into the gap. So what we've done is, based on the dimensions that the E30 M3 seal, or fillet covering, if you like, fillet seal, wants to see around the glass, which is basically 9mm behind the glass and 7mm around the glass, Rich has he's routed these sections in 18mm MDF, then segmented it all up, and then polyurethane glued it to the glass, cleaned the glass, polyurethane glued it all the way around the glass to give us the exact standoff. And then what we're going to do is, Tom is then going to make the frame in 1.5mm aluminium, and then he can make that to exactly fit around the surface of this MDF, and then we can actually glue. I mean, this piece isn't going to exactly fit yet because he's not at that stage yet, but basically he's going to make that exactly fit around the screen aperture, and then we're going to glue that using a more easily removable glue. We're not quite sure on what glue yet, but we're going to glue that to the outside of all the pieces of MDF, so the frame is then fixed to this, and the whole lot can then be fitted into the car can be made to fit it, and the whole lot, the aluminium, then permanently bonded into the body. Then we can go around, cut the blocks out, cut the glue off all the blocks, pull the glass out, and it'll leave us the aluminium as part of the body that will hold the screen aperture the correct shape, and hopefully everything should work. It's quite labour intensive, quite a big pain, but we're pretty sure that'll be a good way of progressing this job without it getting any more complicated than it already is. So hopefully that'll work. So that's that side, and the other side of work that Tom was doing before getting onto this and doing the bits on the Escort was finishing the Nightmare doors, which are now basically done. There's some more tweaking needed on one side, but one of them is now fitted and riveted on. We decided rather than carrying on tweaking the other one, we'd walk away from it for a little bit, have a little bit of a break because he'd just about lost the plot trying to get those right. So, but one side is now on and finished, and the other side is relatively close. So yeah, good progress there. If it's been something of a nightmare on the doors, at least it's progress now. And yeah, he's making good progress on the Escort, getting good progress on this now, so hopefully we can get this screen aperture finished off, and yeah, that's all moving forward nicely. And then, last but not least, I'm not going to walk through and look at it now, unless should we look at it now, or shall we? No, we'll leave that till I'm just leaving a bit of suspense there. The Camaro tub is now painted. The body tub is now painted, so I'm going to say that's all for me, folks. We'll see you in a week's time, and I'll sign off on a nice bit of footage of Camaro gaining its final colour.